Conversations with Leaders for Aspiring Leaders. I am Brian Lass. And joining me today, I'm all too privileged to welcome Beth Milliard, who is a staff sergeant with the York Regional Police, a fantastic service. I used to don their uniform, albeit mine said auxiliary, of course. And Beth, as well, is a PhD recipient from Walden University in criminal justice and public policy, I believe it is. And certainly the list of fantastic accolades go on and on, as to which I'm sure many will talk about today. So, Staff Milliard, I thank you so kindly for being here.
And thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here talking with you today.
Excellent. Greatly appreciate that. So, perhaps the best place to begin, if I can quote The Sound of Music and age myself at the same time, the best place, how does it go? Let's start from the very beginning, a very good place to start. So, I mean, did you yourself always endeavor to want to become a police officer, or this is something that just kind of came out of left field?
No, actually, it's a interesting story. I grew up in a policing family. So my dad is a 30-year retired police officer now, has been retired for a while. So growing up in the family, I had no aspirations whatsoever to be a police officer, nothing. More kind of geared towards the law aspect, and actually went to school, went to university for, started in political science and then ended up doing criminology. But it's interesting you say that, because really what got me into policing is when I was done at school, did some traveling, came back, and actually joined the OPP auxiliary. And,
Okay.
kind of at the time was looking for kind of a volunteer outlet. But, my first ride along, it was, it was action packed. And I'm like, okay, where do I sign up after that? And then, and then it just kind of went from there. I did 2 years with the OPP auxiliary. And then got on with York, and then I never looked back. So yeah.
Excellent. And it's interesting you mentioned about auxiliary, and it's certainly, you're almost prefacing what my experience was, albeit I think it was my second ride along. I ended up in a foot pursuit in 4 District at York Regional Police, but absolutely the auxiliary program, for those of maybe watching who are thinking about getting into policing, absolutely amazing volunteer experience. And I will say for certain, well, one of the many great things I can say about YRP, absolutely the auxiliary program was fantastic. So many great experiences, and made a lot of great friends and acquaintances along the way, not just with the auxiliaries, but with the PCs as well. So absolutely a great organization. Now, that being said, certainly right now you're at the rank of staff sergeant. Of course, you've risen to the occasion, and congrats on doing so. Of course, there's some successive ranks below, if you will, frontline, a sergeant, and all the like. So even with that being said, and certainly I was did my best, I guess, in investigative impression by looking at your LinkedIn, I guess, and trying to, gauge your background. Absolutely, obviously very impressive. A lot of work you've done with looking out for officers' well-being, whether it's occupational stress injuries, mental health, and all the like. So I'm certainly, interested, and plausibly a lot of people watching, if you could sort of walk us through the steps. I mean, how the career progressed, if this was something as to where you are right now, was this cognizant, where you're really meticulous about all these steps, but, sort of walk us through it.
So I guess this is a conversation about leadership, and I think it goes back to even before policing. So before I even joined the job, I spent 5 years in the customer service industry. So server, bartender, corporate trainer, for 5 years. And everyone kind of says, well, how does that really relate to being a police officer? But when you look at the core competencies today to be an officer, conflict management, communication skills, all that kind of stuff, that industry actually really did me well. And, the old adage, treat people the way they want to be treated, the customer is always first. And really that just kind of carried me into policing. And so when I got into policing, I always wondered about the whole mental health aspect. Probably growing up with a father that was in the service, no one ever talked about mental health, and I always wondered, why is there such a push on being physically fit when we have nothing for mental fitness? So really, it just kind of took off from there. I did I was in uniform. And then very early in my career, I actually made kind of a bold move, and people kind of to this day are kind of, oh, do you kind of regret doing that? As I left frontline and actually went to the administrative side of policing. And again, not the kind of high, risk, high, you're not dealing with bad people. You're actually writing policies and procedures. However, I got to learn the administrative part of policing. I got to learn to network with a lot of key players in the organization, which actually brought me to my master's degree. And one of the topics of my, there was a couple topics that floated around for my major research paper, but one of them was we really started to focus in on our internet child exploitation unit. And the big thing in policing was, and remember, this is 2008, is why were police officers leaving that unit with PTSD? And everybody was kind of dumbfounded. Like, they sit in an office all day. Like, whoa, how is this stressful? And what are we doing as an organization? So really, it started with that. And I took that on, and it grew from there. And a lot of great things came out of my master's research that just kept growing into the positions I went into. And then to go to the new chief and say, as a constable, we need a unit for the health and wellness of our members. To very bold move because, following the rank structure, but I honestly think that's really how it began, and, timing, and also always continuing my education. So yeah, a lot of great things came out of the wellness stuff. For sure.
That's excellent. And, I think it goes without saying, and albeit I'm sure we'll talk about leadership from various angles, but one of the big ones being, really in its essence, leadership, it's not, about being in charge, as I say in all my episodes, about taking care of those in your charge. So obviously indicative of you, sort of rising to the occasion in that regards as well. But maybe if I could pose it to you this way, we talked about, again, leadership, taking care of people, but really as maybe a starting point here, what does leadership really mean to you?
Well, it's interesting too, because I find with policing is that a lot of people think their worth in the organization is going to the next rank and going to the next rank. So I always say to the people that I supervise is, there's a lot of great leaders on this shift. There's a lot of great leaders on the platoon. You don't have to be in a formal leadership position to say you're a leader. Like, we have our coach officers, our detective constables in CIB that mentor the people coming in. Like, there's all that forms of leadership. And I find that we get so lost in the ranking system that, like, I know people that are like, I'm going to be a constable for the rest of my career, and I'm okay with that. I enjoy policing, and I also enjoy teaching others. So that's where I think the ranking system has, kind of hasn't really been the best for us. And yeah, I just always, in the back of my mind, is that there's always leaders. We can always have leaders on the shift, and you don't have to hold that rank. So.
For certain. And I think there's, certainly something to be said about leading from the front is how I believe it's usually, equated to. And really, as long as you decide to take care of the person to the right and the left, you're a leader, kind of thing. So absolutely, we need those people in the front lines who know the role and can certainly, sort of rise to the occasion in that mentorship rank without having to put a set of chevrons on their shoulders. And obviously those people are very, very valued. And I'll tell you, even for myself, I really had appreciation for that. As soon as I endeavored to put a set of chevrons on my shoulders, all of a sudden the game changed, and you learn very steadfast what it's all about, so to speak. So absolutely, yeah. I echo into your sentiments. For certain. Now to sort of backtrack for a second here, because I know prior to policing, you were talking about being in sort of a customer-driven industry or dealing with people, really, and certainly policing is a big part of that. So would it be fair to say, and absolutely, I want to sort of gauge where you stand on this, but as far as maybe when you look back and first coming to understand or even have appreciation that there is this entity, this skill called leadership, would you say that happened sort of prior to policing, or was it when you first donned the uniform? When was there maybe a pinnacle moment you came to appreciate this? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question, because that always, people are like, are leaders born, or can leaders be developed, right? I think I actually kind of believe in a little bit of both. I think too, the other issue too with policing is people, they put on that uniform and then they change. And for me, I'm the same in the uniform and I'm the same without, right? You have obviously more responsibility. But again, to me, it comes how you come down to treating people, how others want to be treated. And even when I was a PC on the road, I worked in the northern part of York Region, and your nearest backup could be 20 minutes away, 25 minutes away. So I think from there, I got a real sense of, okay, even though, I'm going to have to arrest this person, or this person's just committed a criminal offense, how you treat them and how you put the cuffs on them and how you get them in the car uh, really determines, how that's going to play out down the road. So I don't know. It's hard to answer. I definitely think leaders obviously can be developed, but again, I think it's that mentorship piece too, which is a big
That's
thing. I think police services are kind of missing the boat on is that whole mentorship piece. So
Gotcha. And maybe just to stay on that, on sort of this landscape, if you will, for a moment. So, I mean, for yourself, was there one maybe sort of time where you thought to yourself, you know what, I want to rise to successive ranks or roles here with my police service as such, okay, now I'm really realizing there is this skill, this entity called leadership. Was there any time that maybe you decided to pursue this as more an academic study, something you wanted to put your mind more to learning more about it? I mean, I'm kind of curious how this idea of your appreciation of leadership sort of came about. I think is a point I'm trying to arrive at here.
yeah, and actually, I have my master's degree in leadership. That's what I decided to do my master's in. Um, and again, it's interesting. I always tell people you don't need a master's degree to learn that. To me, leadership is how you treat people. And
Gotcha.
I learned very early on. There was a story about Southwest Airlines, and when 9/11 hit, and all the airlines kind of went bankrupt, or had to lay off people because of the industry, and Southwest Airlines still survived. And looking back, and it's like it was how they treated their people. And I always said that if we take care of our people, they'll take care of everything else. Where other
Absolutely.
services are more, well, we're community driven, and not saying that we're not for the community. It's just how is it when we send, and this is why I'm big on mental health. We have a police officer that's suffering in silence, and now we're putting them on the street to deal with somebody in crisis. It's just a recipe for a perfect storm, right? So getting back to actually really, really looking after our members, and people like, oh, that's easy. And I'm like, no, like this is active listening, knowing the baseline of your members. I can go on a platoon today, and even I switched platoons after I was promoted, and know everybody's the name of everybody's spouse, their kids' names, where they live,
Sure.
how far their commute is, like all of this stuff. And it's not because I'm nosy and I want to know these things. It's just
Sure.
so when things kind of go off the rails in their life, or performance starts to slip, or there's issues, then I kind of already know what I'm dealing with, and it makes my job easier. And it's just I care about my people, and I
Yes.
want them leaving policing in a good place, right? So
Absolutely. And you know what? You mentioned the idea of a mentorship. Just to backtrack a little bit here, and I'm trying to keep tab in my brains of all the points here. The grayer my hair gets, the harder it is to do. But nevertheless,
oh
so just on this idea of mentorship, or I guess as people within any organization start to rise to these perceivable leadership roles. So now we're talking about the realm of middle management, supervisory, whatever the case is. And again, to your point of perhaps there being maybe a perceived lack of mentorship. So I guess what I'm wondering, and maybe speaking more from the leadership angle, I mean, do you yourself feel that there is perhaps a little bit of a lack of leadership, and not speaking specific to your organization, just the overall sort of landscape. So, i.e., maybe to word this a different way, are people in these perceived leadership roles more managing, using this autocratic style, do what I say because I'm seeing it, or so in other words, being authoritarian, or are we still maybe swaying away from that? Are we doing better with that? But I guess overall, what I'm trying to gauge is what you feel perhaps we can do to maybe almost on a dime start to get these leaders switched on to the idea that, hey, this is what leadership is, and maybe these are some things you can start to be cognizant about.
yeah, no, absolutely. So I know I often do get asked this question, and again, this is my opinion, but kind of old school policing is people would be promoted based on the number of arrests, the number of tickets, how many homicides they solved, like all
Yeah,
those kind of things, which is good, right? Because we're very numbers driven.
sure.
So it's very hard to go out and look at like community policing. Okay, because we don't, yeah, to measure preventative things that we do in the community. So we're very numbers driven, which is fine. And obviously, you're doing good work, you should be rewarded for that work. But then what happens is we promote people that are really, really good at their job, but not necessarily good with people, right? And then you get, there's the conflict and, you don't know how to manage people and, just very different personalities. So we are getting better at that. I know we have a good program at York, and I know other police services sending people to do different leadership management courses and stuff like that. So we are definitely a lot better than we were. But a specific mentorship program, and how I found this is when I was doing my research for peer support, there was a huge gap in the literature that looked at the effectiveness of peer support specifically for police organizations. Like for the last 20 years, everybody's saying do peer support, especially in the States, but no one's actually measured its effectiveness. So through my literature review, I actually found a lot of articles about mentorship programs and how there's a lot of studies done on mentoring and just the positive results that come out of mentoring and how people have really risen in their career because of the mentorship. And not only that, mental health. People are less stressed at work because they have that mentor to go to. So yeah, definitely something I think should probably be maybe a necessary thing in police organizations as well. I also find with policing is once you get in, depending on where you work, they either try to make you a generalist, they try to make you good at everything, or you get pigeonholed on one side. You start in homicide and then now you're an investigator for the rest of your career. So, right. So I think too, we have to kind of figure that out. Like, do we want specialists? And probably in the bigger services, you can do that, where the smaller services, you kind of need somebody that can do everything. So that's a little bit different when you look at the mentorship as well.
Gotcha. And it's interesting you mentioned the idea of, a frontline person, let's say, as for such example, plausibly now earning their set of chevrons because they were great in the front line. But I could tell you, as I said in my last episode, I put chevrons on my shoulder. I fell flat on my face and realized very quickly it's not about. Let me tell you what section 77 sub 1 paragraph here of the POA says, because I used to be a prosecutor. No, it's your back's hurting because your vehicle's too small. Well, okay, it's that kind of stuff, right? So it's certainly a whole different caveat. But again, to your point, I mean, I know, for example, speaking to different courses, I know the Ontario Police College has the frontline supervisory course. I know the Canadian Police College has some staple courses as well. So certainly to your point, it is seemingly the case that we're getting better, or at least acknowledging, okay, to the newly conferred supervisor or someone newly confirmed to the realm of management, this is very much in constellation with leadership. So let's address it accordingly. So certainly hope this is indicative of obviously going in the right direction for certain. Now that being said, and I guess getting to the notion of creating this environment where people can feel like they're protected, supported, latching on from this idea of peer support, things of that nature, and certainly anyone really, us being humans, we're going to be reactive to our environment, if I can word it that way. Policing environment, a very dynamic environment, but still, with that being said, would you say that it does solely rest on the shoulder of, let's say, the sergeant or staff sergeant, someone at the supervisory or management rank, to basically create this environment that's conducive to good morale and growth and, really, I guess, an environment that people actually want to show up to work? Would you say that rests more with the supervisory, the leadership contingency, or is it sort of a two-way street, would you think?
Oh, that's a great question. Definitely, I think obviously officers need to take responsibility, but no, I would say as a supervisor, being a supervisor, as a road sergeant and now a platoon commander, definitely I think it's what the supervisor brings to the table. And I've been told that because I've replaced people that they're like, wow, it's like, night and day, right? So absolutely, I think it's incumbent on the person coming in to create that environment. And if that, the morale isn't good or there's issues on the shift, is to deal with them right away. And that's another thing too, like the old mentality was, oh, we'll just transfer that person, or, we'll get them to go somewhere else, instead of actually dealing with the real issues, right? Again, but that comes down to the human factor. And so just for example, we were talking on parade a couple blocks ago about having, it's called a blue wall of gratitude. And I actually did it when I was, so I was a frontline sergeant during COVID.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
when people would come in and you see the looks on their faces, like, and this is like at the very beginning stages when we really did not have a lot of information, right? We just knew this awful disease is here, and now we're forced to work and go out and deal with people. So we didn't really have a lot. And the organization didn't have a lot. Like, they were giving us information as they were getting it. And people got really down and really negative. And finally I just said, okay, wait a minute, let's go around the room and talk about what we're grateful for. And everyone just kind of looked at me like I had three heads. And I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And the air about the room, just everyone just calmed down, and people actually had smiles on their face because they're like, you know what, we don't have to worry about paying our mortgage. We are at home now with our kids. We're saving money because we're not taking our kids to the hockey tournaments.
Sure.
We actually had a family dinner, like, so. And then we continued it during off time because we actually were on like a reserve where we were off for 12 days and on for 4. And I continued to check in on our members during those days off. So now, we're still in COVID, we're in the third wave. So, and now I'm a staff. I'm like, why aren't we doing this kind of, I call it the blue wall of gratitude, and everyone gets a sticky note and put something good. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Everyone's going to say this is weird. And like, again, everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. Let's start doing that. Because as police, we kind of get so kind of sucked into the negative that
Sure.
we forget. And I think this is my role as a leader, is to remind people why they joined this job in the first place, right? And the good things, the helping
Of course.
people, going home at the end of the day knowing you did something good, as opposed to all the trauma and kind of all the bad stuff we see.
Excellent. So one thing I wanted to, I guess, hone in on, because you mentioned the idea about, plausibly someone newly taking over a platoon, stepping in, maybe it's sergeant or staff sergeant or whatever, and maybe things may have otherwise been in disarray, if you will, whether it's morale or just the way the shift was run. So I'm certainly interested, walking into this such scenario, do you perhaps have any maybe advice, skills, tips or tactics that someone may want to employ from day one, walking into that seemingly unforgiving scenario for certain? I'm quite curious what your experience has been with that.
I think one of my big things is when I am new to anything is I kind of sit back and watch first, because first of all, people, they're already kind of on edge because they don't know who's coming in. It's kind of like the devil, the devil you don't know, is this going to be good for us? Isn't. And the problem with policing today is there's so much turnover with retirements and promotion that, back when I started, we had the same staff sergeant for like 5, 6, 7 years, and then they retired. Where now, like, people are changing like every 12 months, 18 months. So it's actually really hard for the members. So the first thing I did is, I got on platoon, and fortunately I got to stay at the same district. So my thing was, everybody kind of really already knew me. I just moved platoons is, I'm here for, this reason. I'm gonna, eventually, like, I was here, I got promoted. I'm eventually going to call everybody in and have a one-on-one. But quickly, this is my background. I don't know everything. I don't say I know everything, if but I'm here for questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll try to get the answer for you. So my whole take was just kind of sit back and observe. And then from there, I would bring people in one-on-one. I would talk to them, get to know kind of where they wanted to go, what training they wanted to do, that kind of thing. So I think at the end of the day, it's kind of like, don't go in there as the new supervisor saying, and we see it all the time. People want to make their mark. I'm gonna bring all these changes in within the first 2 weeks, and
I gotcha.
right, and kind of sit back. And if it's not broken, then don't change it. And then if the stuff that you see needs to be changed, kind of put the wheels in motion for that. But just remember that the people that you're supervising are already on edge because they don't know what to expect. So again, to make that kind of more seamless, I guess, coming in. Yeah.
For sure. Now it's interesting you mentioned the idea perhaps about, gauging someone's interest in further training, things of this nature, and certainly not to preclude the type of officer we talked about earlier who's happy just to do their 30 years in the front line or whatnot. But I mean, for myself, I'm one of these people who always likes to see some sort of light at the end of whatever tunnel I'm in right now. Here's where I'm going. Here's a training. Here's what I like to do. So it's interesting you mentioned that. But I guess sort of talking about this from a leadership lens, I mean, would you say that a big part of leadership is about actually creating other leaders as well? And if so, like in this regard, do you see some kind of threshold with maybe letting someone run too far ahead of the herd? Do you think it's bad if someone wants to, as Brian Lass has been told one too many times, shine too bright and try too hard, perhaps, or but something in this regard? I'm kind of curious to gauge how you go about that, because again, in the staff sergeant role, I would imagine now a lot of people are going to look to the staff sergeant to talk about perhaps where they want to go take next steps, things of this nature. So certainly curious how this comes about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You hit two really, really great points, and this is probably should be Supervisor 101. Is you're right. I think the biggest thing is finding out where people want to go in their career and try to get them to go there. Like, do what you can, whether it's secondments, training, they strive to be a sergeant, get them to write their promotional exams and then get them that experience. Absolutely. But you're right. We have like new people coming on that are just so thirsty to get in there and do these drug arrests. And I always say, not that I don't want you guys or girls doing that. You got to learn to walk before you can run. So let's get comfortable in the basics of policing before we, are, starting to now like, breach people's charter rights and searching unlawfully and doing this kind of thing. And I see it. So I think you're right. You're absolutely right. As a supervisor, it's kind of twofold. It's kind of reining people in when they kind of need to be reined in, but still letting them know, like, it's awesome that they're being eager and they're out there and they're trying to learn and they're trying to, catch the bad guy, I guess, and like do all that fun kind of police stuff that people sign up for.
Sure.
But also too, really, and there's people that have come to me that, are unsure. So even, saying, in my career, this is what I did, or these are some avenues you can take, and even being that. And I think too, especially in my area where I've done a lot of continuous development and education for myself.
Of course.
So, it's not bad for me to say to one of my members, it wouldn't hurt for you to take a university course or this conference or whatever, because I've done the same things. So I think to I've been there, I've done that. And I think just, talking from your own experiences, what worked, what didn't work, and then kind of letting them decide. So.
Excellent. Well, I tell you what, Staff Sergeant Beth Milliard, you've been so very gracious in lending your time, and this leads us, I suppose, to the infamous parting ways question, if you were, and you sort of touched upon it in our last little part of our conversation, anyways. But certainly, for those who want to, whether it's get to the next step or think about 3 steps ahead or whatever the case is, I mean, to say, okay, do X, Y, and Z courses and do this, there's obviously no foolproof plan. I mean, you can make suggestions. That's certainly the point I'm trying to arrive at right now. I'm wondering for you, if someone was to pose the question, hey, what's your advice or insight for me to, perhaps whether it's get to the next rung in the ladder or maybe strive to be a staff sergeant, someone who's, maybe an acting sergeant right now, something to that regard. I'm certainly curious to get your insights. What type of advice you may be willing to offer all those watching.
Well, first of all, always do something that you're passionate about. Being a supervisor, and I always tell people, be careful what you wish for as well, because once you do make it to the next rank, it's not about you anymore. It's about the people that you lead, right? So you really have to be passionate about, going to the next rank. But for me, it's people driven. So if you're one of those people that people come to you already as a constable and they're asking your opinion, you're a coach officer, you're already doing the right things. Again, and then to me, I always say to people too, will it fit with your family? Because, a lot of people maybe strive to that next level, but it's just too early in their career or they have a young family. So I always say, make sure, be selfish here. that's
Sure.
awesome that you want to go to the next level, but just make sure that that's in it, because again, that's the other thing is, I would hate to push somebody to the next level who, maybe it's not the best fit right now. Not saying they can't do it, but how does that look for your family, and will that be okay with your family dynamics? So, so do what you're passionate about. And, if the sergeant rank or higher like doesn't come, just remember that people can be informal leaders, and you can be leaders every day in what you do. And just it's for me, it's timing. And it's really just surrounding yourself with good people and being a good person.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate absolutely all the advice, the insights, based on your professional and personal endeavors. And we thank you so very kindly for your time. Staff Sergeant Beth Milliard of the York Regional Police. And of course, for each and every one of you for tuning in, watching, and all the fantastic, gracious feedback. We, of course, appreciate it. And we will see you on the next episode of Calling All Leaders. I'm Brian Lass. Till next time.